Welcome to the Emotional Eating Unwrapped podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, an emotional eating and weight loss coach for women looking to fall in love with eating, create healthy attachments with food, and lose weight sustainably. Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today's episode, I think a lot of people are going to relate to. We are talking about how to navigate food FOMO, right? How to navigate food FOMO, the fear of missing out, that ever scary scenario where you have decided that maybe you are not going to eat something and it's there and everyone else is eating it, and you are just worried that you are going to miss out, right? So if you ever found yourself at a social gathering, right, you're eyeing some sort of dessert or you're feeling torn between your goals and the joy of, or that perceived joy of indulging in your favorite food, I think you're going to really like today's episode, because we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about that. It's almost like this monster that comes into our brain that kind of takes over and is like, oh my God, this is the last time you're ever going to have this. You need to have this now, right? Because food FOMO, it's not just about wanting that slice of cake. It's not just about like wanting something. It's so much deeper than that, right? When we get that feeling, that almost like this fear, right? It's like this fear feeling. It's like a visceral feeling that we're going to lose something, right? And we're never going to have it again. That's what the feeling is, right? It's almost like, oh my God, something is being taken away from me. I'm never going to have this again. Or there's like a charge underneath it that's not just simply like, it's not just simple, right? It's a urgency underneath where you almost feel like there's a compulsion. And the reason for that is because when we have food FOMO, it's not just about the food, it's about the emotions, it's about the memories, it's about the belief systems that we have around eating and food that have been conditioned in us for a long time. And this is something that I personally wrestled with for a very long time. It was a big thing and a main trigger for my personal binging and, my personal struggle with, binging and purging and all that stuff, is because I had a very difficult time, until I didn't anymore, dealing with the charged emotions that would come up when there was food around, that I had this almost irrational fear of not eating. And I think that that's really what it is. It's like there's this irrational fear that we have that's like so visceral in our body of not eating it. And a lot of it's rooted in a scarcity mindset that we've all been conditioned to carry, right? And so when we really just kind of drill down to it, it's really a scarcity mindset. It's a scarcity mindset that if we don't eat the food now, we're going to miss out on something and we're never going to have it again. Right? Like that's like when you just peel back all the layers, it's really just the human scarcity mindset. And once you really understand that, and you can move into an abundance mindset, and you can move into a mindset with food where you really feel that the belief system that food is abundant, that you'll have this again, that your decision to not have it now is not a dangerous decision. You're not going to get punished for it, right? Because that's really what we are worrying about, right? Not food FOMO. If you take that to the end of the line, it means that we are going to not have something, we're going to miss out, and we're going to feel bad. But if we can reframe that to, that's not a real thing, food is abundant. If we can get our nervous system there, then, we're golden, essentially. Because food FOMO does not have to control you, ultimately. Food FOMO doesn't have to control you. We'll start with the basics again, right? Like, what is food FOMO? And why does it happen? So at its core, food FOMO is the anxiety or discomfort of not indulging in certain foods. And oftentimes we We experience this in social settings, right? We experience this through diet culture, right? Like if we're on a quote unquote diet, which is why I don't, subscribe to those things. And I never think that diets help you long term because ultimately you're basically just reinforcing scarcity mindset and a belief system around scarcity mindset rather than abundance mindset, training your nervous system and your mind and your brain to trust that food is safe and food is abundant, right? That's where we want to get to. Diets, macros, all the points, all these things, they kind of train your brain in this weird way to stay in scarcity mindset, right? To stay in rules. Okay. And so, like I mentioned before, I experienced this a lot, right? Where I would have the voices, and I hear my clients say this all the time about the voices, right? It's like the voices. And I totally understand that because the voices say this might be your only chance to have this dish. This might be your only chance to have this. And then there's also, it's like, if I don't take seconds and thirds right away, there's going to be nothing left for me. Like someone else is going to have it and I'm not going to have it. And what it creates is this sense of urgency. Like it's not going to exist after this moment. But it's not a real thing. That is a mindset that's been perpetuated from years of dieting, from years of labeling foods as off limits. Right. It's also other people's behavior with food, right? Maybe your role models had this type of behavior with food also. And it's something that you think is just normal. Okay. And so, and then when we look at it in another lens as well, when we think of food FOMO and we think about the social triggers, right? You get this unspoken pressure to join in. So there's that added element to it, especially if you are in a place right now where you're trying to connect with your hunger and fullness cues and you are creating a more sovereign, resilient relationship with food. Food FOMO cannot just be an internal thing that you're worried about missing out. You can also get the external pressure from people being like, just have a bite, or, oh, come on, like, you're no fun, join in. It's almost like if it's someone's birthday and, if it's someone's birthday and they are having a birthday cake or like they're having an indulgent meal, you might get the pressure of feeling like if you don't partake, then you're actually not celebrating. And that could lead to FOMO too, but that's not a real thing. I remember what it felt like to be stuck in the cycle of emotional eating. I tried every diet out there, counting, tracking, restricting, but nothing ever worked. Food controlled my life, my thoughts, and I constantly felt guilty after eating. But once I learned how to heal the emotional triggers behind my eating and trust my body, everything changed. I stopped obsessing over food, the weight started coming off naturally, and I found real freedom in how I ate and lived. So, I created the Sober Eating year-long mentorship to help other women experience the same transformation. So you can stop battling with food, you can lose weight without deprivation, and you can feel confident in your body again. In this mentorship, you'll have access to my proven nervous system rewiring method. You'll have access to live coaching with me, weekly accountability, and a community of women who truly understand your journey. You'll also have free access to my signature programs, the Emotional Eating Solution and Decoding Permanent Weight Loss, valued at $2,000. Click the link in the show notes to explore the mentorship today. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right there with you every step of the way. Okay, that's not a real thing because what happens is that FOMO ends up usually when we give in to FOMO, it tends to lead to overeating. Right? It tends to lead to overeating. Because when we feel deprived, we tend to overindulge when the food is finally available. Okay, so if we are in that mindset of, the fear of missing out with certain foods, and then it is available, and then we feel like it's this dangerous or forbidden thing that we've given in. Usually we end up overeating because we are feeling guilty and we're subconsciously punishing ourselves because of it. Right? And that's the all or nothing mentality, right? I already had a piece of cake, so I might as well have another. I might as well do this. I already failed. So I might as well just let it all go and just, I'll start again tomorrow, or, that's it. I might as well just go down the spiral. And I was there so many times, right? With the intention to stay on track, but then I would let myself indulge, but mainly because I had this mindset and this belief system of the all or nothing, the good or bad, right? So I felt like I did something forbidden, and then the floodgates opened, and then I'd eat more than I needed. And then I'd feel guilty, and then I'd tell myself I messed up, and then it would trigger another cycle of, of just not being connected to myself and just punishing myself, restricting, and then having the same feeling of FOMO, because FOMO only exists in a world where we restrict and we have this antagonistic relationship with certain foods. Whereas if we don't have an antagonistic relationship with certain foods and we relate to foods just based on our own attunement and hunger and fullness cues and personal eating strategies and plans that we've made for ourselves, if we relate to it that way, then we can't create this antagonistic relationship with food, and FOMO doesn't exist. Because FOMO isn't about the food. It's about the emotions wrapped around the food. Right? It's about the fear that we associate with the food of connection, of joy, of belonging, right? And then on the other side of it, the fear of being judged, right? And the fear of losing control. So it's never really about the food. And so ultimately, FOMO is about an antagonistic relationship with food where there's an exclusion belief system, right? I can't, this is something I can't have. So to heal that and to shift that, we need to start thinking about food inclusivity. And this means allowing all foods into your eating routine without labeling them as good or bad. It's taking food off the pedestal. Food is not that powerful. And once you take food off the pedestal, you see it for what it is, which is just food. But this can be hard to take food off the pedestal because on some level, our conditioning likes putting food on a pedestal because we think it's the food that creates the joy. We think it's the food that creates the sense of connection, but it doesn't. Food is neutral. Food is neutral. And when we can train our nervous system to believe this in its cells, you start to have a sober eating lifestyle. Right? One of the biggest shifts for me was retraining my brain to understand that I could have indulgent foods at any time. The cake at the party, I could have it. Right? There's different ways I could have it. It doesn't have to be 3 pieces of cake or nothing. I could have a cake tomorrow if I want to. I just have to have my internal eating strategy, my internal eating accountability to know that I could do it. This is something that you build. And this is where true food freedom comes from, right? If there's nachos or something or pizza at a party and I wasn't feeling it, I didn't want it, I could have it next week, right? There have been so many times in the last bunch of years where I was looking forward to eating something indulgent, but then when push came to shove and it came time to have it, I actually didn't really want it. And yeah, I had a feeling of a bummer. I was excited for this and I wanted it, but now I don't want it. So I'm not going to act from the place of when I wanted it. I'm not going to be well, I wanted it a week ago, so I guess I'll have it now. No, I'm going to have it. I'm going to not have it because in the moment I don't want it. And I have abundance mindset, so I know that I can get it again when I do want it. When you normalize the idea that food is not urgent, it takes the pressure off. Okay. So you want to really ask yourself, do I want to eat this right now? Or am I eating out of fear? Or am I eating out of fear of missing out? And start to train yourself to be able to not need to eat food from any other place other than how you're feeling in that moment. Right. And then there are certain ways that you could even like enjoy something, even if you didn't necessarily like, even if maybe you weren't in the mood for it, but you wanted to like experience something. There's ways you could do that too without triggering a binge or triggering an emotional eating, right? So sometimes people will be like, well, social settings can be tricky. Okay. But you want to practice in social settings, having boundaries, saying no without guilt, right? You want to practice taking smaller portions potentially so you can feel included without overeating, right? Because missing out on an overindulgence, it doesn't mean that you're missing out on joy. It means that you're gaining alignment with your goals and your relationship to food. And so reframing food FOMO is all about building self-trust, right? When you allow indulgent foods into your routine and you practice this attunement to yourself, you're teaching yourself that you don't have to binge or restrict. You're showing yourself food is not the enemy. It's just one neutral part of life. It doesn't have to be the main event, the main focal point. Right? And when you're in social gatherings, you could try to shift your focus away from the food as the heavy focal point and more onto the people, the conversations, the experiences. And just think about it, right? Like when you eat from a place of FOMO and you overindulge, oftentimes we just feel so gross in our body that we're not able to be present. So you'll be able to be more present when you approach it this way. Okay. And so just to end, overcoming this fear of missing out with food, it's a practice. It's a journey. It takes rewiring of the nervous system. It takes, a lot of mindful energy, paying attention to certain patterns, being willing to be with uncomfortable emotions, right? This is the real work. This is the real work. Okay. And this is the work that I do in my mentorship, my Eat Freely, Live Fully mentorship. If you're interested, there's going to be a link in the show notes for it. You can click there. You could find out all the details of it. A really amazing intro month deal. So that's really good if you want to join. There's coaching, there's accountability. You get coaching from me multiple times a month. So, you can ask your personal questions. So it's a really great place for emotional support. There's an amazing community of women. And a lot of times emotional support is what we need in order to rewire our behaviors with food. Okay. So thank you so much for listening today. If you're listening on Apple, if you're listening on Spotify, please rate the podcast, leave a review, leave a comment. It really helps us grow the podcast and get more people listening to, this amazing message. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. And as always, I'm wishing you an amazing week. Remember that whatever you're working towards, you are enough. You are great. You can do it. You are worth it. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.